Welcome everybody. I'll give you a minute to join us. Everybody's very welcome to the session today. Brilliant. So I'm delighted to be here with you today. My name is Dr. Gemma Irvine. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Vice President for Equality and Diversity at Maynooth University in Ireland. We would have loved to have welcomed you physically to Ireland, but unfortunately in the current climate that wasn't possible. So we're having to hold this virtually, but hopefully in the future I'll be able to welcome you all to Ireland. So this is the first session of 3 exploratory mutual learning workshops that are being held on gender and digitalization. We're recording each session, and this one is focusing on ICT and digital skills for women. These exploratory mutual learning workshops are being organised within the framework of the Horizon 2020 Gender Action Project and coordinated by the Standing Working Group on Gender in Research and Innovation under the European Research Area and Innovation Committee. So it's a nice long acronym, ERIC, SWG GRI. So I'm delighted that we have a representative from the Portuguese presidency, Maria Siqueira, and I'd like to introduce her first to say a statement. Maria holds a degree in economics and has worked as a policy analyst at the Foundation for Science and Technology, FCT, where she currently coordinates the Studies and Planning Office. FCT is the main research and development funding body in Portugal and plays an important role in the internationalization of the national scientific and technological system. Her work at FCT has focused mainly on the analysis of research and innovation policies, but has also been involved in a variety of other areas such as smart specialization strategy. And she's an active participant in the ERIC Standing Working Group for Gender in Research and Innovation. You're very welcome, Maria.
Okay. On behalf of the Portuguese Presidency of the European Council, I have the honor to address to all of you this message to the Chair and Vice Chair of the Standing Working Group Gender in Research and Innovation, Marcela Linkova and Martin de Grand, to all Member States and respective delegations, to the Irish delegation and Gemma Irvine in particular, to all experts and researchers that kindly accepted this invitation, and to all audience. The digital transition is at the core of the European policies for the current and next programming period. And together with the Green Deal and an improved economic and social fairness, are founding pillars and constituent to a more sustainable Europe, a Europe that will fully embrace and commit to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Building a climate neutral, green, fair and social Europe are common priorities for the German, Portugal and Slovenian trio, with the social pillar being central to the Portuguese presidency. Digitalization is an ongoing process, unstoppable, a crucial matter that is bringing us up to new paradigms, social, cultural, scientific and technological, economic, political and ethical, and an issue that should be further studied in its full implications across the whole society, rather acute when considering its quite dramatic speed. Diversity within and across countries, even when with the same technological profile, across regions and sectors, and across diverse cultural strands, do add complexity to this approach, namely to the identification of non-uniform patterns of job losses and creation, of stereotypes perpetuation. Diversity will translate into multiple inequalities. Striking is the relevance of digitalization to the development of knowledge itself, unquestionably, immensely leveraging the reach of science and the tools for researchers, women and men, to broaden their ambition to frontier research, their common sharing and their networking being instrumental to open science practices. However, the digital is not gender neutral, and thus the approach on the mutual learning workshop and its discussion paper are focusing on gender inequalities stemming from, aggravated, or smoothed by digitalization. The Portuguese presidency mostly welcomes this initiative by the Iraq Standing Working Group Gender in Research and Innovation, and this approach to the main drivers, patterns, alerts, turning points, and adequate policies to overcome those gender imbalances. One last note to emphasize again the social pillar in the remit of the Portuguese presidency, where social questions, including gender, are core priorities. We do highlight the European Union's social summits at Porto, May, with two events, the high-level conference and the leaders meeting at invitation of the President of the European Council. Issues as the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights, including employment, qualifications and social protection, and the Europe's Gender Equality Strategy 2020-2025 will be significantly addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria, and a copy of your statements will be available after the session, so thank you. Now, I would like to introduce my colleague who needs no introduction, but Marcela Linkova. Marcela is currently the head of the Centre for Gender and Science at the Institute of Sociology in the Czech Academy of Sciences in the Czech Republic. Marcela is the chair of the ERIC Standing Working Group on Gender in Research and Innovation, and she also leads the Gender Action Project. So Marcela will introduce both of these initiatives today and also explain our workshop's objectives. Many thanks, Marcela.
Thank you, Gemma. Thanks for the kind invitation and introduction. It's really a huge pleasure to be here today at the launch of the three workshops that the Standing Working Group decided to organize on the topic of gender and digitalization. And we have just heard from Maria about how important this is. And I really appreciate the support of the Portuguese presidency for these events. At the outset, I really want to thank Gemma Irvine and her team for taking the lead on this initiative. It has been quite substantial amount of work that has been done in the subgroup on gender and digitalization. And so thanks so much for leading this work. The topic of gender and digitalization is on the work program of the Standing Working Group for the years 2020-2021. And when we were mapping the topics that we want to address in the Standing Working Group, this was the one that was coming up very strongly as a priority area that we are all very keen about, that we need to learn about and exchange on. But we discovered that there is actually very little in terms of policy that we can rely on. Hence, we decided to organize what we term exploratory workshops, because we can't really say anything very substantive and on the topic yet in terms of policy. And so we really look forward to also receiving input and comments and suggestions for recommendations throughout today and also at the other two workshops. I will now start sharing my screen for a brief presentation of the Gender Action project, just to give you a little bit of background, because Gender Action has been supporting the Standing Working Group subgroup on gender and digitalization with the background paper and other actions. And I think that it might be actually of interest for you to also learn about our other work that we have been doing. So Gender Action is a project that has been running since April 2017. And we focus on mainstreaming gender in research and innovation policies in the European Union and beyond. Our main work is to coordinate policy advice on gender equality policy, build capacity to foster gender equality in research and innovation in a network across the EU and beyond. And we consist of representatives appointed by national authorities in member states and associated countries, many of whom are members of the Standing Working Group on Gender in Research and Innovation. So these are the practical pieces of information about the project, but very importantly, we're a large consortium with 14 project partners from the countries that you can see, and 3 associate partners from 3 additional countries. And what we set out to do was to map and analyze member states' progress on the implementation of gender equality policies, specifically the national action plans and strategies for ERA, to deliver training and mutual learning events to national representatives as well as national contact points. Also to prepare policy briefs, and I will mention those briefly, and also build collaborations to advance gender equality in international cooperation in science, technology, and innovation. So what have been our main achievements so far? I think that I won't be boasting too much when I say that we have succeeded in becoming one of the main advocates for gender equality in European research and innovation. We have delivered more than 50 specific recommendations on mainstreaming gender in European research and specifically in Horizon Europe. So we were very actively involved in the negotiations of Horizon Europe. And our messages have reached really a large portion of European policymakers, research organizations, research funding agencies, as well as the research community more broadly. In terms of policy evaluation, we have identified the core elements that go into ensuring a robust process of policy making. So delivered advice on how to set up the core elements that need to go into policy that then can deliver, is properly monitored and evaluated. We have also shown how important it is to really vigorously monitor and evaluate policy implementation, and I'm sure that we will be speaking about this in the Standing Working Group in the months to come as well. We have also delivered evidence showing that careful attention must be paid to defining indicators, because sometimes in the EU we work with the indicators that do not really measure progress towards gender equality, but measure other things. And also in connection with this effort, we have contributed to better understanding the differences in the EU 27, the newer and older member states, smaller and larger. In terms of mutual learning and exchange, our events have proven to be an excellent tool for sharing knowledge, increasing the professionalization of our work, and learning from each other in a collegial and supportive spirit. And I'm sure that we will continue this effort with these mutual learning workshops on digitalization as well. We have reached more than 500 people working in various fields of research and innovation and policy making at our events. For the Standing Working Group on Gender in Research and Innovation, it's a successor group, advisory group to the Helsinki Group on Gender in Research and Innovation, established in 2017 under the Council of the EU. And here you can see, and I'm sure that the presentation will be circulated, so there are the links. You can see the policy briefs that we have delivered over the years. Most relevant for the topic at hand is Innovating Innovation Policy Brief on Gender and Innovation from June 2019. And so just to finish with what we want to achieve today and at the next 2 workshops is to establish contacts and a network on the topic of gender and digitalization, particularly between the policymaking side and the expert side, to really establish a ground for developing robust recommendations that we can deliver. We want to discuss the latest developments with the invited experts, and I'm really glad to see that we have really significant personalities in the field joining us for these discussions. We want to share experiences and examples of good practice from member states. And as I said at the outset, there are not that many. So we are really glad that the member states that are taking action are joining us to share. We want to identify barriers that hinder greater involvement of women researchers, innovators, and entrepreneurs. And in view of this, develop the recommendations that the Standing Working Group will adopt and agree on, and we can deliver them to the ERAC committee at the end. And also, lastly, we want to collect additional input for the discussion paper, which is, as was said, a living document that will continue to be updated. And so at the end, we want to have a more complete picture of the knowledge that we have available on the topic. Okay, and here just the contact details for your future reference. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the presentations and discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Marcella. And we will make the presentations available after the session. And thank you also and to your colleague, Avril Huck, for the discussion paper that you mentioned that was circulated in advance of today's session. And as you've said, this is a live document and it will be updated with the inputs from today's session and also the following two sessions. So I'd like now to move to our keynote speaker. We're absolutely honoured to have Claudia Sarico. She's a lead analyst in the higher education policy team of the OECD. She's worked and managed numerous projects, including reducing the precarity of research careers for the Global Science Forum at the OECD. She was a lead analyst of resourcing higher education, the project manager of the School Resources Review, and the lead analyst of benchmarking higher education system performance. She is an associate professor at ICT Lisbon School of Economics and Management at the University of Lisbon, and a senior researcher at the Centre for Research on Higher Education Policies. Her research is in the area of operations management and performance management and measurement in particular, in education, higher education and science, and she's coordinating editor of higher education and is on the editorial board of the European Journal of Higher Education and Tertiary Education and Management. She collaborates with educational organisations, government and international organisations to help develop more effective, efficient and inclusive education and science systems. The title of Claudia's talk is "It's Time to Close the Gender Gap in Research and the Digital Transformation." You are very welcome, Claudia.
Thank you very much, Gemma. So today I'm mostly going to draw on a piece of work that I did with my colleague Michela Bello, which is called "It's Time to Close the Gender Gap in Research." And then I will add also some other findings and conclusions from other work at the OECD on gender and the digital transformation. So these findings are based on the OECD International Survey of Scientific Authors, and we do have some interesting findings on women researchers. We see that women are underrepresented in research careers, and on average across OECD countries, women are only around 40% of all researchers, but they are considerably less likely to be in leadership positions. And we see, for instance, that only 30% of corresponding authors are women. And the role of corresponding author already represents a sign of leadership in research. So women researchers may have less opportunity to both enter and advance in their fields, and the magnitude of these gender gaps vary significantly across fields of research. And we can see in this figure, for instance, that there's near parity in the social sciences and psychology, but that there's only 15% of corresponding authors in physics and astronomy. So we do have a diverse picture depending on the field of research. So women researchers earn less, and this is despite of parity in the quality of their research. And women authors earn on average 5 to 6% less than their male counterparts do, even after accounting for individual and job-related characteristics. So we're talking about field of research, the fact if people work full-time or part-time, how many hours they work, and so on. So when the gender wage gap is particularly wide in engineering and computer sciences, nearly 27%, and in senior manager positions, around 15%. So women are at a greater disadvantage in fields associated with more prestige and better pay. However, we know that the work of male authors is not more likely to be cited or be published in prestigious journals than that of female authors. There's another handicap here because women authors also tend to be less mobile than men are. Around 24% of male authors live in a country that is different from where they attained their highest degree, compared to only 18% of women. And so this figure illustrates the differences of research quality and earnings between female and male scientific authors. And we can see from the figure here that there's really no statistical difference between the quality of the research produced in terms of citation. There's no statistically significant difference between the journal prestige where the work is published, but there is a significant statistical difference in income between women and men corresponding authors. So women appear to face greater challenges in attaining leadership roles. We know from the survey that 80% of female corresponding authors and 85% of male corresponding authors hold a doctorate degree, yet nearly 15% of female corresponding authors are in a subordinate relationship to a senior researcher. So they work for a PI, mostly as postdoctoral researchers, compared to just 8% of male researchers. Now, in terms of digitalization and the digital transition, from the survey, we also see gender differences on the use of digital tools. Women authors appear less likely to seize opportunities brought about by digitalization. They are less likely to use advanced digital skills or share data and code. But they are more likely to engage in activities aimed at building and maintaining their digital identity and to communicate information about their work online. Now, these may mean that women need to put more effort into having their work recognized. And this is in line with findings in the literature that men typically get more credit for co-authored papers in tenure decisions, and that women are held to higher standards when seeking to have their papers published in top journals. And in the reference, in the work, we present references to corroborate this. Now, there is also some additional findings, and you can find the whole findings in this paper on charting the digital transformation of science. And the additional findings relate to the fact that there's no significant differences in the use of digital productivity and collaboration tools, and that female authors do appear more likely to report access to digital infrastructure as a challenge. There's no evidence of significant differences in attitude between women and men towards the impact of digitalization on science. Now, what we see is that gender parity is being achieved at the doctoral level across the OECD. Things diverge as women advance in the career. So what we find and what we conclude is that countries need to make systemic changes in academic structures and institutions to address gender issues and keep the momentum to track and evaluate the results of the range of actions and policies to achieve gender equality in science. Now, if countries fail to remedy these gender discrepancies, they risk wasting considerable talent that could have otherwise made valuable contributions to their research systems, and knowledge production itself becomes inherently gender biased. And this is really important for the quality of science. So if you don't have equal representation, it means that the results of science are inherently biased. Now, we have an analogy here. We think that science needs a turning point similar to what happened in the music world. So in the 1970s and 1980s, many orchestras began using blind auditions in an effort to mitigate any gender-related biases among judges. The experiment marked a turning point for female musicians as the percentage of women in orchestras increased dramatically, and now in many countries it has achieved gender parity. So science today needs a similar turning point to eliminate systemic biases against women, and it may take similar bold ideas to get there. So I can show you also some other work, some other recent work on this issue that comes up with some ideas for recommendations to move forward. And so this slide is based on gender in a changing context for STI. It has been published in the OECD Science, Technology and Innovation Outlook, which is published every couple of years. And what it says is that most countries are implementing policies to address gender equity, which is the good news. But the not so good news, and where more work needs to be done, is that policy initiatives remain fragmented. So there is a need for strategic and systemic and sustained long-term approach. And there's three main vectors here. One is to monitor and address long-term challenges in scientific education, training and career. So throughout the education pipeline, from early education to continuing education, and also with professional development during the research career. Then ensure that digital education and training strategies provide full and equal opportunities to girls and women and do not enforce traditional gender stereotypes or introduce digital discrimination, so that the digital transition does not just reproduce the same stereotypes and ingrained discrimination. And third, ensure that the contribution of all disciplines and supporting professions is fully recognized, valued and rewarded in the transition to open science, and that there's greater transdisciplinary research. Also because we know that women and men are not equally distributed along the disciplines. Often there's a strong emphasis on STEM and the devaluation of, for instance, arts, humanities, and the social sciences, and I think later on one of the speakers will probably address this as well. And that, in fact, we need all the disciplines to work together. We need more transdisciplinary research to address the really intractable and big challenges that we're facing in terms of equity, climate transition, demographic changes, migration, and so on. And that is also that research is not just about the PIs, but also all the supporting professions around research, and that there needs to be a recognition and a reward for all this diversity. The other piece of work that I think can give us some insights is a more recent one, published last year, on building digital workforce capacity and skills for data-intensive science. And here, what this piece of work has to tell us is that capacity building efforts need to create a workforce that reflects the diversity of society. And of course, this includes gender, to ensure that science is not only more productive, but also more responsive to societal needs. And there is substantial evidence of gender inequality in the digital world, and I've spoken all the evidence that we have about that. But policy interventions can help and do help to pave the way to greater inclusion of women. And we need to work on these policy interventions. We need to learn. So these peer learning exercises that we're doing here today is important, because we need to learn from each other what works. And what can be scaled up to make it sustained and a systemic intervention. There is a fundamental role for education and training in bridging the digital gender divide. It needs to be part of a systemic approach. It needs to promote ICT use, skills and learning, and it needs to empower educators and making them active agents of change. So those that are in the field that come up with interventions that work, they need to be empowered and recognized, so that then we can scale up these initiatives that can help make a difference. And there are really a range of initiatives, and this publication offers a number of case studies that encourage gender diversity in digital roles and more broadly in science, technology, engineering and mathematics. There's an interesting example from CFR in Canada that supports specific training programs for schoolgirls and young women to raise awareness of AI. So I leave here some links to further information, a chapter that I've co-authored that has just come out at the beginning of the year on challenges and new demands on the academic research workforce. I've been working also on the precarity of research careers, and there's a gender dimension to this as well. The results have not come out, but the publication will come out very soon at the beginning of April. And also one of the papers that I mentioned, building digital workforce capacity and skills for data-intensive science. Now, I'm very happy to discuss with you these themes. So just, ask your questions. And of course, you can also contact me via email if you wish later on. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Claudia. Thank you so much. It's fascinating data and perspectives, and particularly shocking, like you say, with the gender pay gap when there's no difference in research quality. So we have some time for questions. I'm aware that you're under time constraints and you'll have to leave us probably at about 10:25. So we do have some time for some questions. So attendees can either type their questions in the meeting chat. There's a little icon at the top of Teams in the speech bubble, and you can type your question and I can see it, and myself and Claudia can see it and answer it. Or if you'd prefer, my colleague Jenny is going to unmute you, or give you the ability to unmute yourself. So if you want to ask a question in person, if you raise your hand on the function, there's a little hand and a smiley face at the top of Teams. If you raise your hand, I will call on you and invite you to ask your question directly. So keep an eye on that if anybody's going to raise their hand, and also give you a couple of minutes if you want to type your question. So I have a couple of questions to start us off, if that's okay, Claudia. So you mentioned that there is a need for strategic and systemic long-term approaches, and particularly actually on your slide 11, you had the 3 points: monitoring and addressing long-term challenges in education and training careers. How do you monitor that? And how would you address that long-term gender equity for those challenges in education, training and careers?
So I think one of the things that is important is to collect data. This is very important, and for instance, the initiative of Europe, of the SHIP figures, I think it's very important because, as you said, you know, the data gives us the picture, but more importantly, if we do it in a longitudinal way, we can see trends. So we can see what is working, what is not working. And of course, that is quantitative data. And one of the things that we found out, for instance, in the Research Precariat project, is that those that are not on fixed-term contracts on research are often not in the statistics. So we only look at those that are on the professoriate, you know, that are tenure, that have, and often, you know, for instance, we know that from not very good data, but from the data that we have, that women suffer more from precarity. They are more likely to be on precarious contracts. So it's important to have good quality data as well and collect data on everybody. So this is one in terms of the evidence base. Another one that I think it's important is beyond this quantitative data, it's survey data. So, for instance, one of the things that have been influential has been a Wellcome Trust survey on research culture. It was very revealing and very worrying, and also very recent Nature, the first Nature postdoctoral survey, and you know, what happens to doctorate holders. And I think this is very important because this is about the perceptions and the experience of people. And so it is important that we collect this data so that we understand what's really happening, and we also get ideas on for new initiatives that may work and that can be scaled up. And that's what we mean by, you know, a long-term approach. You have to keep at it. It's not a snapshot. You have to keep at it.
Absolutely, and I think that sense of figuring out some of the biases that people have, and I think there's about 11 of them, don't go away when you realise that they're there. You have to work around them every day, like you say. I'm looking here. I'm not seeing anybody with their hand up. Everybody's being very, very polite and shy, and no meeting chat. So I'm going to go again with my question, if that's okay.
Yes.
So you also talked about the traditional gender stereotypes and discrimination in science, technology, and innovation. How do we avoid that, and particularly from a digitalization point of view?
So one of the things is at the beginning, right? You have to start early. For instance, at the OECD, they just released a very interesting study of 5-year-olds and about how gendered their perspectives on their future career are even at age 5. So we really have to start early working on these gender stereotypes. The other thing that I find really interesting in this music world, the idea of a blind audition. So some countries, we have seen some of the initiatives that we've been collecting are really trying to translate this into research. You know, when do you need to know the name of the person or the gender of the person, you know, with different applications where assessors do not know who is applying, and they're just judging people based on the strength of their ideas. You know, giving less emphasis, for instance, on track record and more on what you propose to do when assessing research. Some universities as well, they've been trying really to make applications for positions and for promotions as blind as possible, and up to, you know, for longer as possible up in the process, precisely to make less biased decisions. And so I think this is quite interesting initiatives to do this. And in terms of digitalization, I think if we look at I had some here. So we see that the attitude between women and men towards the impact of digitalization, there's no difference. But there are differences really on the challenges faced, like female authors having more challenges accessing, for instance, digital infrastructure. And so having this sort of knowledge, we can start acting on the problems in a much more targeted way. So I think this is also important to do.
Absolutely. It's very interesting. And like you say, that sense that these stereotypes are embedded from that very early age means collaboration across all levels of education is essential. I'm delighted we have a question been asked that I'll read out. So Claudia, what do you think of the difference between gender participation in STEM subjects in Europe compared with Asia, Africa, or other locations? And how can we learn from Asia in particular? Okay,
so I must say first one thing. I'm an engineer by training. I'm an industrial engineer by training. But I don't really like this STEM. I think maybe we're talking too much about this. This STEM classification doesn't exist, for instance, in our international classifications of fields. So there's an international classification that is owned by UNESCO, OECD, and Eurostat, because we're mixing too many things, you know, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And actually they behave in different ways, and the position of women vis-a-vis men, I think, is also very different. You know, mathematics being a pure subject is very different from, say, engineer being an applied subject. So I'm not so sure this construct is so useful, and I know it has become widespread, but I think when we look at sub-subjects, you know, at then we see there's a lot more nuances, and I do think we can look at Asia, Africa, and other locations, but even within Europe, situations are very different. So, for instance, in my country, in Portugal, there's more women doing engineering than in many other European countries. The same for some Eastern European countries. So it's not as if we have to go, but sometimes we can just look at our neighbors. And as I said, if you look more at more disaggregated level, maybe it's more productive, because otherwise my worry is that we, in a way, reinforcing also these stereotypes that women don't go into STEM, or there are problems there. And there are problems, but not in all subjects and not in all countries. So I think it would be useful to look at a more disaggregated level. When I do look at a more disaggregated level, I see a lot more nuances.
Very good, thank you. And we have another question in as well. Could you please comment on the role of the private business enterprise sector, which is the primary employer in the digital fields? How can public policy engage with private research employers? And then how do you encourage gender equality actions in those private research sector?
Yeah, it's true that we do see differences between the employment of doctorate holders in the public and the private sector, depending on the gender of researchers. And one of the things that in this last project that I worked on, that we saw, some initiatives, what they're doing is incentivizing doctoral granting institutions to work more with the private sector. And you know, sometimes I also don't like to talk about just the business enterprise sector, because there's also employment beyond academia in the government sector, for instance, but also in the non-profit sector, in the social sector. So I think it's important to engage and to make doctoral education more outward looking, and in a way doctoral education is arriving at the point that other levels of education have been developing to look at more links with the world beyond academia, where in fact, the majority of doctoral holders now in the OECD countries, they work outside academia. They work in the government sector. They work in the private sector. But we have seen a lot of challenges doing that because of cultural issues. And so those in academia, they don't have much of an incentive to work. They don't get rewards in their career and in the advancement of career for doing that. So changing those rewards, changing those incentive mechanisms is important. And this may be about funding PhDs in collaboration with other organizations beyond universities. It can be also in allowing, for instance, academics to have double affiliations, in companies and also in universities, or spending sabbaticals in industrial settings beyond academia. So I think this is being done. There's more and more of these happening, but it's true there are some cultural changes that need to happen there.
Very good. Yes, and it is particularly a focus of Horizon Europe, given that they are also participants in applying for research funding. And now we have requirements for gender equality plans for the likes of the higher education institutions. And that question as to whether that should be for everybody is obviously a big one there. I'm not seeing anybody else putting their hand up or questions, so I do have one more question up my sleeve, and I'm conscious of time. But you also mentioned that we should try to recognise the contribution of all disciplines and research professions. How do you think we should do that?
Well, I think if we're talking about researchers, we should start at doctoral level. I think one of the projects that is going to follow up from the research precariat that countries are very interested in is to have a look at doctoral education. So in a way, we have to change doctoral education if we then want to make a change later on in research careers. So I think it is important to start there in the... Now I lost my train of thought. Can you remind me?
I can, of course. I'm throwing lots of questions at you. So recognizing the contribution of all disciplines.
Yes, of course. Yeah, because again, this comes back also to STEM. There's this big emphasis on STEM, but we face important challenges in the world, and this benefits from the collaboration and the contribution of all disciplines, including arts, humanities, and social science. And I was saying that this has to start in doctoral education because often these challenges need transdisciplinary approaches. And many times doctoral education is very much focused only on the discipline, and people are very much rewarded for disciplinary expertise and being recognized in their discipline. And so the idea is that we should bring an element in doctoral education of people working with other disciplines and making that more mainstream and more normal. Because in fact, many of the people will, in their life course, change careers, work in different settings, address different issues. And universities can do that because universities, the majority of comprehensive research universities, they have on their campuses many disciplines. So they could facilitate that inside the university as well. And again, we have seen these. Funders also have a role, of course, by making sure that their assessment criteria are not to disciplinary focus and also don't detract people from doing transdisciplinary work, and that there's a framework for that and people are not penalized when trying to access funds for research. Sorry, now I think I responded to your question.
No, it's perfect. And obviously from a digitalization point of view, and particularly artificial intelligence, it's a huge discussion about what is needed in relation to the different disciplines. And also COVID. I've probably got 2 more minutes, and I just wanted, on that COVID point, do you feel or do you see that the COVID situation is really going to increase the gap that we already have and have been working on? So is it expected to worsen? And is there anything in particular that we should be doing to address this?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. So the evidence, we have what is called the OECD Science Flash Survey, where we invited the research community to give their experiences during the COVID period. And unfortunately, there is evidence that there is a divide that is growing between women and men, that is quite clearly the case, and between also an older generation and young researchers. And of course, I'm in the Directorate for Education and Skills. We also have information from school education, and there the pandemic and the fact that schools had to close has widened the divide between those that are most privileged and those that are less privileged. So what we see is a growing divide, and for instance, digitalization at the level of school education and tertiary education, what it has meant is those that were already good students and quite independent students and quite strong students benefited very much from digitalization. Digitalization was a tool for them to learn more, whereas for those that were struggling, in fact, going digital has been more detrimental to their learning. So this is something really that I think the pandemic, the positive thing was that it gave a real push to digitalization. We all started working more with digital skills and making use of them. And that has been great, for instance, in access to events like these. At OECD now, all our events have a lot more audience because anybody from the world can participate, and that is great. But there are some issues that we need to address. And going back to the previous question about the role of disciplines, you know, the first effort to address COVID was very much a science effort, you know, a hard science. But now we really need all the disciplines to address the economic, the social, the cultural, the environmental effects of the pandemic. And so I hope that is realized and acted upon.
Absolutely, and I think that's an excellent point to finish on as well. Many thanks, Claudia. I know that you have to, but we're absolutely honoured to have had you for this period of time.
It was a pleasure.
So, thank you so much, and we will share your presentation with everybody as well. So thank you.
Bye-bye.
I hope everybody is back. So we'll keep going. It's a nice short window of time for the workshop, given everybody has considerable demands on their time. So we're going to get started again, moving into our examples of good practice policies and initiatives from member states. And we're delighted to have 2 countries presenting today. So we've got Estonia and Portugal. So first, I'd like to welcome from Estonia, Kristi Kiivilo, who is the Digital Skills Coordination Director at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications in Estonia. Kristi has been working with ICT skills and digital literacy projects for the past 15 years, with the belief that modern world digital skills are as important as literacy and numeracy. She has dedicated her time to projects that develop basic and advanced digital skills for adults, ICT skills for the unemployed, internet safety, mobile device security, programming and robotics, and using smart devices. And she believes the key to success in digital skills development is the cooperation between the third level sector, the private sector, and policy makers. And the title of Christie's case study is ICT is Everywhere, ICT Work and Career Awareness Campaign for 15 to 29-year-old Estonians. You're very welcome, Christie.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for an introduction. I will share my presentation now. Okay, I would like to talk about two case studies. One is, sorry, it keeps running the cells. One is we made in our ministry, and I will also talk on behalf of my colleague from Ministry of Social Affairs, because unfortunately she's a little bit ill at home. But first of all, ICT and digital skills for women. We do all know that we lack ICT specialists and all over Europe or all over the world. And the study says that only 1% of Estonian teenage girls see themselves working in ICT. On the other hand, 15% of boys see themselves working in ICT. So we need to get more girls. And we started this project or pilot more than 5 years ago because of a survey we did with Skype and University of Tartu. Try to understand why girls don't want to study ICT or work in ICT. And the study says that this is a male area. There are still, was a lot of myths about working in ICT, and actually still are a lot of myths what an ICT person should look like. So we wanted to test different ideas to maybe implement them in a future in a wide area to attract girls. So we did the research, and the project I wanted to talk about is the communication project. But before we go to that, we had to do some homework before that. So in 2016, we updated all the IT professions in central website, because most of the young people thought that ICT is actually only programming, but ICT professions or roles are more wide. So we updated the website. It's in Estonian, I'm sorry. Updated career information. We also trained all the career specialists in Estonia who talk on a daily basis to young people about what profession they should take. We made like a schematic picture what is ICT and where you can actually learn it and what level. So this picture shows that there are roles of professions you can study in vocational level. There are professions you have to have a master's degree. So done all that back work. And what we also did, we asked our IT professionals all over Estonia to talk about their profession. And what we also thought that maybe it's important that if we communicate that ICT is for everybody and also for women and girls, we should also use that language. And we also have to use the actually pictures of women working in these areas. So done that homework. A year later, we started a campaign, ICT is Everywhere. And the main idea was to test if it works. Will women or girls will be more interested in ICT afterwards? Our media campaign was mostly in social media because this is the place young people are, but we also had a lot of TV events and a lot of news and articles in different newspapers, paper newspapers, all around Estonia. And we talked about different paths. We talked about that actually mathematics is not that important if you want to study ICT. And we tried to break the myths and stereotypes. So as the main myth is that ICT worker is a male with a pigtail, and ICT workers fix computers. They usually do it in the basements. So we showed our female role models, and they talked about the work they do in a very high level. In this project, we had two different type of events for young people. We had career option days in schools all over Estonia, and we had 10 separate workshops only for girls. So in this first career option days, the central website was introduced, and the female ICT model role models talked about different careers in what the young people can pursue. But in those 10 separate workshops, the girls actually could make something by themselves, design a product or a mobile app. So they were more like smaller groups and more hands-on, so they could try what is ICT looks like. And total 2,000 participants were all of these events. And what we got back was that after those events, the girls look more towards ICT. But what we did also see that as those percentages present the outcome from those 10 hands-on workshops, if we asked about those 50 different events we made in schools, the percentage were about 20% lower. So it means that girls will be more interested in ICT if they can experience it by themselves. So this is the outcome we got. But this is a pilot. We know the results were good. We should talk more about ICT, different ICT professions, show more ICT role models, female role models, and break the myths, because if we show women on screen speaking, it also breaks the myth that ICT boys are pigtail male. But as this was a project that usually is how is it sustainable and what next? So we inspired our Minister of Social Affairs to actually look deeper what we found. And they started a bigger survey and nudging project. This is still ongoing and will be finished. The final results will be available in June. But I will give you a brief overview about that one also. So the goal was the same: reduce gender segregation in ICT. And main goal for us, for me, is how we can get more women in ICT, because they can do the work, but the myths are too hard to break. So there were 4 phases in this project. Our partners made depth interviews and studies with different focus groups. We planned different nudges to see what works and what doesn't work. And the analysis process is just ongoing. And according to Minister of Social Affairs, after the analysis process is finished, they will start looking how to upscale those nudges what were tested. But about nudges, I will talk about 3 of them. One myth is that if you want to work in ICT, you should know a lot of math. Actually, that's not true. But we wanted to see if we can talk about ICT not in ICT or robotics classes. If we talk about our education system, we wanted to talk about ICT in other curricula. And in this example, we took our English lesson classes, and we prepared class materials teachers can use to learn English. But in this class, actually, the teachers showed kids the TED Talks women gave about programming or robotics, and also showed a lot of interviews in English where female ICT role models talked about their job. And the outcome is that teachers were actually very happy because they could enrich the classes with new material. But kids were very happy because this was not a boring English lesson, but they actually saw the ICT also in English. So this is probably one nudge that will be continued in a larger scale. Second one was job advertisements. Why women don't apply to ICT jobs. And we had a pilot company who changed the job application. They tested it actually in 2 different groups. One group saw the usual ad, a lot of technical requirements needed to be done to apply to this job. And also they had a picture with a male holding a phone. So ICT job for men. The other test group saw ad where were less technical requirements, and in social media there was included a video about the work environment. So there were women, because we all do work from home, women, kids, dogs, and the result was that on that second ad we had more female applicants applying for this ICT job. The outcome we didn't expect. That this company said that they will rewrite all the job applications this way from now on, because it will get more women to participate. And the third one was choosing toys. And 2 groups, test groups, and the goal was to pick a toy for a girl. The first group actually bought the pink dolls, but what we saw that we put on this robot subject B a sign that this is a really good favorite for girls and boys. And the second group who saw that ad actually bought more robots. So this is also a nudging we could use in the future, which toy companies or toy shops we have in Estonia, to make parents, actually to nudge parents to buy not pink dolls, but something more ICT related for them, for children to study and to play with. So sorry, there's a contact for this survey more, but I wanted just one remark from our ministry, that Ministry of economics and communication, we have an ability to pilot and test different approaches. And when we do that, we always include other ministries, because the other ministries can implement the good practices we have. And we work actually on a daily basis with Ministry of Education, because they are responsible for the education system, and also non-formal training, and also Ministry of Social Affairs, because they're responsible for unemployment and also gender education. So that's it. Thank you. I will have my screen back now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Christy. And I can see myself on the screen there, but it's so interesting to hear about the approach that your country has taken. We obviously look forward to the report on the project, and we have some time for questions. So we'll do the same thing again. Attendees can write in the chat, the meeting chat on Teams, if they have any questions that they'd like to ask you. Also, if you would like to ask your question directly, just use the raise your hand function of Teams, which is up at the top, and then I can invite you to ask your question directly. So while everybody's thinking about that, Christy, I might start us off. I love the 3 nudges that you gave us as examples, and particularly the choosing toys nudge, because that links to Claudia's point that we have to target young children if we're to change these stereotypes. So my first question then is, do you have feedback about the impact, particularly on girls, of the events that you've been running?
Yeah, the girls, actually, maybe I will go further back that we had a study in Estonia, I think 5 or 6 years ago, amongst the universities who teach ICT. And we asked them, the ICT students, why did you come to study ICT? What was the reason? And mathematics, they said it was not about, I think 9% who said that they are into mathematics, but 36% of them said that they had some kind of ICT related activities or hands-on activities when they were young. And Estonia, the after school activities are extremely popular. We have sports, music, a little bit IT. So the outcome from that, kids will get, actually they get their ICT spark from youth, from really young people, as Claudia said. So we should start with young people to introduce them ICT, and not only in formal education, but also in non-formal education. And in Estonia, we have STEM Non-Formal Education Union. This is an umbrella for all the after-school hobby clubs. So we're working closely with them because they have a connection to those hobby clubs. So they can teach and mentor the hobby club tutors how to engage more girls, or the other way, how not to push out the girls from those ICT clubs. Because what we see is that stereotypes and role models are very hard to go away. So if there's like a robotics club and they have to do a project, the boys will be programming and girls will be making posters and stuff. But yeah, so that's not good. And through communication, we're trying to change that. And we have also a really good example about Unicorn Squad. This is a robotics club for girls only. They started 2 years ago, and before COVID, they had 1,500 participants. Demand is very high, not enough places. So, and this is for younger girls. And parents were very interested to send their girls to those extremely fun robotic or ICT clubs. So, but there are not enough research about is this only girls club better than boys and girls club, but at least a lot of girls can participate right now. Well, did participate we have also a problem that after school activities are closed. So, and ICT clubs is yeah, not that good. But we're trying to do online ICT club. We're piloting it right now, so maybe it will happen. So yeah, after school activities and non-formal education is also really important for the kids to look at their future career.
Absolutely, and like you say, making it fun as well,
Yeah.
so that they can see themselves in it. I'm doing a check. No, I can keep going with my questions. There was a comment that you're much further down the road than us, particularly here in Ireland. So we've got a lot to learn from you. I was quite interested as well in relation to the disconnecting IT from maths and that sense of helping to break stereotypes. How does that also work? You know, we're often people coming to this conversation for the first time worry about standards dropping. So how did you disconnect the IT from math while still conveying it? It is a standard that we need. That's excellent. Women have that standard, and we're not dropping the quality of the people that we want to come in.
This is yeah, math is a myth actually, but to be in ICT, you have to know the logics. Should be a part of it, but not math. You don't have to have a math in a high level to go to university. We're also struggling because as our universities have limited space to take in ICT students, the standards are really high. And also they want the future students to have a really good grades in math, and the demand is very high to go to study ICT. So we're trying to break that change, but also in this first case study I told about our female role models emphasized in their interviews that you don't have to be excellent in math to study ICT. So think beyond that. You have to be just interested in ICT, but not excellent.
And obviously we see from the data that often it's the young girls who have the highest scores coming out of school. So they are excellent, absolutely. But that's great to clarify, like you say, you don't need math for the ICT. You need the logistics and that thinking. Yes. So that's really important. And the role model piece is really important as well, being able to see yourself. How much do you feel that had an impact on the girls in the events that you were holding and through the nudges?
I think the impact was really big, because the first study that Skype made, one point was that all participants, they couldn't name any female ICT role models. So right now, we already know at least 3 or 4 who participated in this project, and they still talk about ICT from a feminine side. And the role models are very, very important. And in our practical nudging events, we had women talking about their career, in this male industry, we are females and they do web programming. We have they still a very known software testing company, Estonia, and the founder is Estonian. She talks a lot about how to connect family, ICT, and talks to girls also how to come on and study ICT. This is really fun. So role models are extremely important. And if you talk about science, you see a lot of scientists are really usually men. Claudia was here. It was good to see in the morning. But if we also talk about science in Estonia, there are male role models. So science is, but I will deal only with ICT. This is a really big also thing to deal with. So science I will leave to somebody else. But yeah, ICT role models, absolutely.
Perfect. And then my last question would be, are there any learnings that you could give to other member states who perhaps want to follow and do a similar type project? Are there any things that you've now learned through going through this that you would recommend or highlight?
If we want more women to be in ICT, you have to find persons who will influence them. Parents, on the one hand, teachers, after-school activities, and it's really hard to reach parents actually to change their minds. So maybe it could be easier to influence girls through teachers or other after-school activities. The kids will participate and they will be more willing to take in this information. So nudging. Yeah, but also nudging is it's an ethical question also, at how much can you nudge, and the person who are nudging should be aware of that also. So it's about ethics also.
Absolutely, and there's a lot more that we could speak about in relation to this. So we're really grateful. Thank you so much, Christy, for that, and we'll make your presentation available afterwards. And thank you for the follow-up contact details. So we'll see how we go with time, and I may come back to you at the very end if that's okay. But now I'd like to welcome our second speaker and our second country. So from Portugal, we've got Luísa Lucas. You're very welcome. She is chair of the .pt board of directors in Portugal. .pt is the entity responsible for the management of the national top-level domain .pt. Luísa graduated from the Faculty of Law at the University of Lisbon, where she was also a PhD student in gender studies. She was a member of several national and international groups for the development of the Information Society in Portugal, and Luísa had a leading role in the Azores Project Digital Region. She was a member of the mission of the Information Society, a founding partner of APDSI, and is a current member of the Strategic Council of ACEPI and a member of the Executive Committee of MUNDA, the Movement for Active Digital Use. And currently, she's coordinator of the Access of Inclusion of the National Digital Skills Initiative, E2030, in Portugal, which has a special emphasis on gender inclusion. And Luísa believes that digital inclusion is social inclusion. So the title of her case study is Engineers per One Day Project, and you're very welcome, Luísa.
So first, I would like to thank Maria João Sequeira from FCT and Iraq for the invite to be here and be able to share with you and all of the audience the Portuguese concerns about this important matter and the opportunity to show a project, example of good practice, running in Portugal to bring more girls to ICT high schools and of course after that to ICT jobs. Also thanks to Claudia for the great presentation. I retain that men typically get more credit. Hope all the audience retains our words and give us the fair credit. We really need another turning point, yes. And thanks for my colleague from Estonia, Christy, for showing the program ICT is Everywhere. It's amazing. I've been working, as Gemma said, for digital inclusion, in particular, women digital inclusion, for the last years, and I really believe that in our decade, till 2013, digital inclusion is the better way for the social and economic inclusion. Portugal has a long way still to go. As European Institute for Gender Equality shows in the recent studies, ICT studies are the most gender segregated in the education system in Europe. In Portugal, although 54% of higher education students are women, but in areas for science, mathematics, and engineering, STEM areas, this number drops to 43%. And just in engineering, 28%. Finally, in more technological engineering, girls are just 12%. According to DESI, the Digital Economy and Society Index, in Portugal we have 20% of individuals who have never used internet. 20% of our population means 2 million people have never used internet. This is our huge problem, and our huge challenge too, is qualifying Portuguese population in digital skills. So, as I said before, I sincerely believe that this challenge has several social and economic dimensions. These 2 million of digital excluded are mostly citizens with less education, less financial resources, residents outside the big cities, and of course, women. That is why empowering girls and women with digital skills promotes also social and economic inclusion and gender equality. Equality expands the talent pool. We cannot waste half the population. In Portugal, we have several digital inclusion projects and that are currently being implemented and included the gender equality. But there is one that is special because it's focused precisely on this area, girls in ICT. The project Engenheiras por Dia, in English, Female Engineers per Day. The Engenheiras por Dia project is an initiative of the Portuguese government that promotes among the students of non-higher education the option for engineer and technologies, deconstructing the idea that these are male domains. It is coordinated by the Commission for Citizen and Gender Equality, the Portuguese Diversity Charter, the Instituto Superior Técnico, this is a university, and the Ordem dos Engenheiros, the Engineers Professional Organization in Portugal. Female Engineers per Day is a project with a dual objective: more digital skills and more women in digital professions. As we know, and according to the last OECD report, like in most other countries, the gender imbalance in the choice of studies and in computing programming is high. At 15 years of age, less than 1% of girls in Portugal wish to become ICT professionals, such as software developer or application programmer, compared with 6% of boys. This project intends to make female role models more visible, fighting gender stereotypes, and providing girls with opportunities to interact with technology at secondary school. Begun in 2017, this project is now in its 4th edition, and it has been growing and becoming more and more known in schools, but also in companies. Right now, it has 24 schools all over the country, 30 universities all over the country too, 57 companies, and 7 municipalities, which are the local authorities, very important in Portugal to manage the local schools. In 2020, we launched a new website with a new image and logo. The website contains the calendar of activities, reserved area for schools and partner entities, and an interactive content. What are the activities for this project? We do workshops for students on the choice of professions, teacher training on gender equality, it's very important, engineering challenge, Girls in ICT Day and other relevant events, pilot mentoring project in several companies. In this relevant topic, the young female students experiences for a day to be engineers in a company. That is why the signature of this project is Engineers for a Day to Experience All Life. It's time to conclude. The world, Europe and Portugal need a green, digital and inclusion transformation. This month, in the 10th of March, the Commission proposed an European Digital Compass to translate the UE digital ambitions for 2030 into concrete terms. And the first cardinal point is precisely digital skilled citizens and highlight skills digital professionals. With more women should take up such jobs. Last week, the European Union signed the Digital Declaration under Portuguese presidency, a green and digital transition with gender equality. And finally, the Web Summit last December in Lisbon, a virtual edition, of course, showed Portugal as a country committed to the digital transition with a purpose, and that purpose must be humanist. Women's rights are human rights. I will try to show you a brief video for this campaign. Thanks a lot for this opportunity.
Hi, I'm Kristi from Estonia, and very interesting. I just wanted to know, maybe you can share more information about the field trips and virtual workshops you mentioned on your slides. What are field trips, where and how long, and what will the participants see, and also about the virtual workshops? Just a little bit insight.
Yes, there are a lot of workshops during the lective year, now virtual workshops, and we have companies and the schools working together, and we have people in the companies who explain what is ICT jobs, what is ICT engineers, and explain to the students. Otherwise, we have workshops with universities, technological universities who wants to have more girls, because this is a huge problem for the universities, and the workshops shows all the courses, all the matters that young girls can aspire to go if they choose ICT engineers, and the workshops works with universities and companies too.
Thank you. Just an additional question, is if it's okay.
Okay.
About companies' involvement in all of this. We in Estonia we're a little bit struggling because the companies cannot see the value of those events. They are working on a daily basis, and the students who come to the offices are little bit, how can I say, not a distraction, but this is not the companies do on a daily basis. So are your companies willing to take the students and show them around and talk about ICT companies, or you are also struggling a little bit with this cooperation?
Yes, in Portugal, it's it's very easy to have companies in these kind of initiatives, because they understand that after that they can have more girls in ICT jobs. And in Portugal, we have a huge problem because we have a lot of employees in ICT employees, and we have no students to go to the jobs. So this is an opportunity for companies. The first one was Microsoft and Google in Portugal. And after that, all the companies wants to have one day for the young girls. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I will get back to you later on, maybe by email. That's interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Louisa, what are the main reasons that girls do not want to study and work in ICT areas, do you think?
I have not all the reasons, but I can guess some of that. I think is cultural. I think is something about education, family education, and school education. And of course, we need to deconstructing the stereotypes about that. Christy shows the experience about the tools, the toys, choosing the toys. It's very interesting because when we go to a supermarket or another, and we need to we look at the market, and the toys for girls are in the one side, and toys for boys are in the other sides. And the toys for girls is not technical or softwares or games. Technical games is not for girls. That's why. But I think now we have the chance to do the difference, because this kind of problem is in the agenda, and we need to have more and more events like that, and talk about that, and after we can have more and more girls in ICT. I hope so.
Absolutely. And I'll ask you a similar question to Christy from a learning's point of view. Given the work that your country is doing, are there any things that you would point out to other member states who are thinking about doing a similar project? Anything that you learned along the way, or main recommendations?
Yes, because we are now in a global labor market, so we need to join our projects to bring more and more girls to ICT jobs and ICT studies, because all Europe needs more ICT jobs. All Europe needs more girls in ICT studies, and more women in ICT jobs. So this kind of projects must be everywhere. Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely. And I think it's excellent to be able to point to initiatives like yourselves, particularly when we're trying to convince our policymakers to engage in something like this. How hard did you find it to convince government and policymakers to put the money behind initiatives like this? Or I caught the tail end of the questions asked before. Is it very much that sense that everybody's bought into this? They're just trying to find the answers or the reasons to solve.
In Portugal now, we have a Secretary of State for Gender Equality that are very concerned about this matter. So it's easy to have this kind of projects, but we sometimes after an Expo we have to have a government. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. Money. It's all about money, of course. It's not easy to have money in Europe now. We are in a pandemic crisis, and hope that the resilient and recovery plans in Europe have this kind of concerns, equality, gender concerns in all the plan of recovery from that kind of situation. Okay.
And thank you very much, Louisa. That's excellent. And I think as your presentation has shown, Portugal is a country committed to the digital transition with purpose. So I think that's fantastic. Louisa, you might be muted there. So we're coming to the end of our session now. So I'd just like to thank you, Louisa.
Thank you.
Very much. We're so delighted that you could join us today, and also for sharing the case study with us. So just to close this session, I'd like to go back and actually thank all of our excellent speakers today, Marcela Linkova, Maria Sikira, and particularly Claudia Sarico, Christy Kivilo, and Louisa Lokish. And I'd also like to thank the members of the IRAC Standing Working Group on Gender and Research and Innovation, who had a subgroup on gender and digitalization. So thank them for all their work in putting together this session and the two to come. I'd obviously like to thank my colleagues, Jenny Rothwell and Sam Blankensee, for their technical supports today, and also to thank all of you, our attendees, for taking the time to join us here today to talk about this very important area of research and innovation. We very much look forward to continuing the discussion with you in the session 2 and 3, which would be held on the 15th of April. So thank you so much, and until then, stay safe.